Kavanagh, Councillor for Bay Ward, and I'm here tonight with Councillor Riley Brockington from River Ward and Councillor Jeff Leiper from Kitchissippi. And we're all just going to say just a few quick hellos and comments before we get started, because we've got an excellent team from finance here tonight. We have Isabel Jasmine and we have Stéphane Desegny, who are going to give us a presentation on the budget process. So this is for the 2021 budget. And as we know, this is going to be a very different budget based on what's been happening in 2020. Tough year, very different, and has left us with some challenges. So we're going to go through it just so you can see what the process looks like. So I'll hand it over to Councillor Leiper next.
I put that chip in my mouth just like I knew.
Oh, I'm so sorry. You want to?
That's okay. No, you know what? Because I'm really quick. Obviously, there's not a lot of aspiration that's going to be on the table in this budget. What I spoke to the mayor about was particularly housing and homelessness issues, where we have tough choices to make in this budget. I've asked the mayor, and I'll be asking council as we run through the process, to focus on housing and homelessness issues. The pandemic has made very clear the divisions in our Ottawa society with respect to haves and have-nots. The issues that are facing our most vulnerable residents are not just their issues to face. Right across the city, we're seeing the spillover effects of housing and homelessness issues into every facet of our city. So, I'm obviously I have my priorities every year, but this was the shortest priority list I've given the mayor yet in my meetings with him, which is housing. But I obviously am curious to hear what residents have to say. Thanks, Theresa.
No problem. So, Councillor Riley Brockington.
Thank you very much, Councillor Kavanagh and Councillor Leiper. Welcome, everyone. This is the first budget consultation for 2021 for our 3 wards, and we're very happy that you're with us tonight. This is really an opportunity to listen. The 3 of us, can talk forever about what we know are priorities for a number of our residents. But the goal is to give you sort of a high-level overview of how the budget process works, how staff piece together the budget, but to listen to your priorities and to remind you that this is by no means the only opportunity to feed into the 2021 budget. There will be multiple opportunities to provide feedback and input, and really this is just the beginning. But I just want to echo that 2021 is going to be very challenging. The City of Ottawa as a corporation took a number of hits on our revenue side in 2020, and the goal really will be is how do we address these revenue holes in 2021 going forward without really impacting services that you and your communities rely on. So it's very important for us to see how our staff are drafting the budget when the budget comes out in early November. But really, these opportunities help us better understand what your priorities are. So I'm here to listen tonight. And again, thank you for joining us.
Great. Thank you very much, Riley and Jeff. As you heard, challenging times. And that means the reason it's challenging times is because there's more vulnerable people out there. And those are the ones that we have to think of first. So despite the tough times, we have to make sure that those people who need us the most don't fall through the cracks. So that's the ultimate challenge with less funding. So without further hesitation, I'm going to pass you on to our experts, Isabel Jasmine and Stéphane Desegny are going to do our presentation. Thank you very much for both of you for coming out tonight. Yeah, okay, good.
Thank you very much, Councillor Kavanagh. Okay, so if we can put up the presentation.
Connie, got it? Great, thank you.
Perfect. Can you put in presentation format? The tab at the bottom. keep going over one more, two more, sorry. Yeah, next, there, right. Click that. You click that one, yeah. There we go. So my name is Isabel Jasmine, and I'm the Deputy City Treasurer. And my team is responsible for pulling together the budget for the city. I'll be giving a short overview of the city's budget, its composition, the budget process, and ways in which you can provide input to that process. La présentation va être en anglais, mais vous pouvez poser vos questions en français et je peux répondre en français. Okay, next slide. So there's an overarching framework for determining how much needs to be collected from taxes to pay for city services. We can work backwards from a tax target or build up to a number, but really it's best to start with a target to make sure budgets remain affordable. The city must estimate and determine any increases to expenditures resulting from inflation, increases from collective agreements, changes in regulation, legislation, growth to service new neighborhoods, and changes in funding from other levels of government. These are then offset by savings from efficiencies that can be achieved from operations, increases in revenues from fees that are charged directly to users of city services, and taxes from new assessment that particularly help to pay for increased operating and infrastructure costs to service those new neighborhoods. This year, we also have to consider any additional budget pressures we expect from continuing to operate in a COVID pandemic environment if it continues into 2021. So we are taking those into consideration for 2021. Okay. Next slide, yeah. The total operating budget for 2020 was 3.76 billion. Close to 60% of the operating budget is made up of 4 key services: water and sewer, police services, transit, and community and social services. As you will see on the next slide, much of the revenue for these services comes from sources other than tax. Water and sewer is paid for by revenue from the water bill. Half of transit is transit operating costs are paid for by fare revenue, and over 80% of community and social services are paid for by provincial and federal funding. Roughly 14% of the operating budget goes towards capital cash reserves to help pay for infrastructure renewal and growth. The remaining 36% of the budget covers all the other services delivered by the city. Okay, next slide. Next slide. So here you can see that just over 50% of the revenues come from taxes and payment in lieu of taxes, which is what we call the taxes paid for by other levels of government. Another 19% comes from federal and provincial grants, 25% from fees and charges, such as the water bill and transit fares and park and recreational fees. Okay, next slide. The capital budget for 2020 was $813 million. The high asset intensive areas are primarily for water and sewer services, transit, and transportation, which includes roads. 66% of the capital budget for tax supported services is for the renewal or replacement of aging infrastructure. And on the rate side for water and sewer, 84% is for renewal of assets. The remainder is for growth, which is primarily funded by development charges. And there's also a small number of projects identified for regulatory or strategic initiatives. What is not included in this total are projects of strategic importance that are not approved as part of the budgeting process, but require a separate report and approval from council. Examples include the light rail project or the central library. Okay, next slide. So as you can see here, 60% of capital funding comes from the cash reserves put aside as capital contribution from the operating budget. The remainder of the capital program is funded by debt, funding from other levels of government, and development charges. This slide is intended to show that there is a very little discretion to reduce spending for many of the city's services. The police budget is tabled separately, and council does not have discretion to make the line item changes. They can only approve or reject the budget in its entirety. Budget reductions in other areas like transit, fire, paramedics, and roads must be accompanied by changes in service standards. There is also a long list of services or expenditures where there is no discretion because these services are mandated, regulated, or mandatory, such as the long-term care, public health, housing, and then debt charges. There's little more discretion in areas funded by fees, where the fees can be increased to recover the cost of delivering the service, or in areas where there are no specific service standards or for administrative support services. Next slide. So council approved the budget directions for 2021, which are summarized here. Municipal tax target set at 3% overall, citywide levy of 2.5%, Ottawa Police Services levy of 3%, the transit levy at 4.6%, which includes a $5 million increase to the contribution to capital, which replaces the canceled provincial gas tax increase. An annual additional taxation revenues from growth forecasted at 1.5%. And then rate programs increase revenue by 4.8% overall as per the long range financial plan for water, wastewater, and stormwater. User fees and charges increase in accordance with the fiscal framework or long range financial plan. And in this budget, we're also looking at including a surcharge for any services that potentially would have increased costs due to COVID, so that we're also recovering COVID cost increases for those that are direct user services. The capital budget be developed in accordance with the direction outlined in the 2019 DC background study and the long range financial plan and fiscal framework. Okay. Budget directions were approved on October 14th, and public consultations are taking place throughout October. All budgets will be tabled with council and the various boards and commissions on November 4th. From that date to December 9th, the individual budgets for each committee, board, and commission are reviewed. It's at these meetings that the public has another opportunity to provide feedback and input on the budget via public delegations. Then the budget is approved by committee of the whole and council on December 9th. Individual committees have the flexibility to make recommendations to make budget changes that could be funded from reductions in other committee budgets. Final approval of these recommendations will be made on December 9th by council. So this is a list of the budget meetings at which public delegations can provide input and recommendations. The list can be found on the city's website and is updated if there is any changes made to the dates. And the final slide. There are several resources available to you and ways that you can provide input to the budget throughout the year. Engage Ottawa provides a comprehensive online engagement platform that allows you to connect with the city in an interactive manner. To provide input, you can complete the online survey, you can send comments via Engage Ottawa, or you can contact your councillor. You can also get additional information on the city's website at ottawa.ca/budget. All feedback is reviewed and considered. Your participation in this public meeting today is greatly appreciated, and I look forward to answering any questions you may have on this presentation. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Isabel. We can take questions, and I did have 4 questions that were submitted ahead of time as well. And the way we'll do it for the questions is you can do the raise hand feature. So I look under participants and see who's raised their hand, and we'll keep track of them. I got a couple of staff people here tonight who are going to help me out in case I miss anybody. But I can start off just with the ones that were submitted ahead of time until we get some. One of them is from Marianne McDonald from Ambleside. And it's not really a budget question, but I'm going to put it out there because it's my favorite question. It's about promoting tap water. Why don't we promote tap water? So this is not a budget question, but basically it's suggesting that we do more work in promoting our wonderful, excellent quality water. And why aren't we doing it more? I will take that question myself to those who deal with that. I actually have asked them to do that before, and I'm thinking of ways myself of how to do it. So thank you, Marianne. We have a question from Annette Dillon. How much funds are allocated to ensure minimum of 4 hours care to residents per day in the 4 municipal-owned long-term care homes? Now, I don't expect you're going to be able to answer that, but how is it that how it's allocated? Do we just follow the provincial guidelines, or is it over and above?
Specifically for the 4 hours, or like, I don't know the answer.
Yeah, I think I'll have to send that question to Dean Lett and have him answer that.
Detailed question.
Yeah.
Theresa, can I just jump in there for a second? It's Riley.
Yeah, sure.
I was wondering if, just to stimulate some questions, whether I could put Ms. Jasmine on the spot and just ask her to highlight some departments within the city that she believes may be under some pressure in 2021 as a result of the financial challenges that we're experiencing in 2020. Should the public expect a steady state budget with no major fluctuations, or is there something that you would like to just make people aware of to get them thinking about any areas which may be seeing some monies move from one pocket to another?
So I mean, I can speak to what we've experienced this year, and our greatest budget pressures have come from reductions in revenue, specifically on transit side and then parks and recreation. And so if this continued on into 2021, we would see similar impacts. Ridership is down significantly for transit, and with social distancing, we need to actually keep the same number of buses, but for fewer riders. So it has significant operating implications. So transit is one area for sure that we can, if this pandemic continues, that would be impacted. Parks and recreation also are impacted because of the number of programs they can deliver and to the number of people too. So they're affected on the revenue side. And if we are shutting down parts of facilities, there are some savings in terms of resources and operating costs. But we, and in this year, before the stage 2, or the phase 2 rollout, when all our facilities were closed, there's still some costs to keep those facilities running. But if we don't open a facility at all, then we actually have much higher savings. So those are the two significant areas. And then our paramedic service, emergency protective services, they're impacted by the PPE and all the equipment that they need. So all those things that are being taken into consideration of what we've experienced in 2020, we have to project what would happen in 2021.
Thank you. There's a question from Cheryl Parrott about sidewalk maintenance and snow removal, and wondering if it should be built into the budget, because last year we had a mild year, but this year could be a lot harsher winter, and we have adequate money for plowing and clearing. I guess the question is, have we allocated more than we did last year for that?
Has a comment? Did you?
Thanks. And Isabel, forgive me, for our for the 2020 budget, how did we perform with respect? Because we've been putting significant new money into snow operations every year that I've been a councillor. Did we work within budget last time, and by how much?
And so we had a mild winter, but we had a lot of freeze thaws. Like we had a lot of events. So we're actually, it wasn't a normal winter last winter. So our first quarter, we did see more. So we don't know what the last quarter will bring. So we're not into December yet, but the first quarter was unusually higher than usual. Every year we've been increasing the budget, and I think it was as of last year, we brought it to the 5-year average. So each year we've been supplementing that budget to bring it up to that 5-year average.
And we've been going beyond the 2%, like we're supplementing on top of that to try to get us up to a more reasonable amount. So for the first 3 quarters, how are we performing against budget? For the first 3 quarters, I'd have to go and look it up, but I believe we're above budget. Yeah, we're above budget for the roads area. Okay, so we need to, so are we, do you know if we're proposing to supplement again to get our budgets up top? Well, again, we don't want to increase it too much. We want to keep that 5-year average,
and then but shifting that 5-year average. So we're continuing to maintain it to that 5-year average. And in years where we end up with a deficit, we make it up in surpluses in other areas. So we do try to balance it, not to start to spike up too quickly.
But we haven't seen that surplus in some time.
No, yeah. and we don't know what December is going to bring. So until we see the full year, then we'll know how much we need to supplement in future budgets.
And I think Cheryl made a good point with respect to her question, in that we often find ourselves waiting until the calendar year turns over before certain operations begin. So we've had a couple of years maybe in a row where snow removal should have really started December 25th, December 20th, and we've seen that it's waited until the end of the year when the calendar year changes over. And you know, a lot of us as residents believe that that's due to the new budget kicking in on January 1st. And I hope we're not going to find ourselves in that situation again, where we're holding off critical operations because the budget's not there.
No, that's not how operating decisions are made.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jeff. I've got one more that was done ahead of time, and then I'll get to the ones that are in the chat function, because people are sending them in the chat function, which is great, because then we can read them, and Isabel can check them out too ahead of time. One more that was sent ahead of time by Laurent, and it's en français. Dans quelle mesure avez-vous évalué l'impact du budget sur les différents segments de la population, sur les différents groupes de femmes et d'hommes par catégorie d'âge?
Oui, chaque programme calcule ses montants. Alors, si c'est un programme spécifique, il détermine qu'est-ce qui est requis comme budget pour ces programmes spécifiques-là. Alors, moi, je ne peux pas parler de chaque programme spécifique, mais chaque département le regarde avec un œil à chaque groupe qui servent pour les programmes.
Yeah, and just to follow that, I'll say it in English, is I constantly ask about the gender lens, and that I will continue to do during the budget process. As the council liaison on women and gender equity, I find that it's very important to keep asking that question, and not just have you done it, but how. And I'm hoping to incorporate that actually in our report, so that we just do it automatically, so I don't have to keep saying it. But I think that's coming around, and also on diversity. So that's a good question. Merci beaucoup. So Roland, what are plans if the province and feds don't deliver on money that we hope for? If we don't know what the funds are coming, when might we know?
So for 2020, we're very comfortable that we will receive the money that year. I'm assuming this is for COVID. The question specifically, to cover the cost of COVID. And what we did in 2020 is we very quickly moved, because we didn't know if we were going to get funding, to look at deferred capital projects. And we've put a lot of that money aside. And so we've put those in reserves as a backstop in case we don't get additional funding in 2021. We're hoping that the senior levels of government will continue to help to fund our COVID pressures in 2021. But if they don't, we've put enough money aside from deferred projects to backstop the budget.
Okay, thank you. Paulette has a question on homelessness. Do you want to ask it, Paulette?
Yes, that'd be fine. It's all right, Theresa. I don't mind, because it's kind of like in two parts, and I'm not quite sure. The second part depends a bit on the first. So I wanted to get back to Jeff's comments on homelessness and that issue. What we've seen I live in Hintonburg, for those that don't know, and what we've seen over the last couple of years is a number of homes that had certainly affordable rent for a great number of people that live in the community are now, they're either down because they've been bought and a developer is developing them into a $1 million place, or they've just been taken over by new owners. So we're seeing this homelessness increasing on our streets that we could see outside our doors. I think it's probably a stupid question, but can some of the money that the developers pay, can some of that be used for some homelessness initiatives? Is it possible to move that pot from one to another? Or are those fees all set by the province and so the city doesn't have any leeway there? Is there any way to increase that? I'm not talking about gouging the developers. I'm not talking about doing anything like that, because I'm not, that's not my intention. My intention is just trying to find other places, sort of seeing the direct correlation between new development and increased homelessness on our streets. I'm wondering if there's a way to put those two parts together that ends up giving us more money. So that's the end. That's my question.
Want me to answer that? So, I mean, I can start there. There's a portion of development charges that goes to affordable housing. So there is a component of it's small. There's new regulations that have come in called the community benefit charge, where it'll give us a lot more flexibility in terms of what we can do with that. So that's an option to use that for those purposes. And also, I think there's a request that affordable housing be built into new developments, percentage of it, or so inclusionary zoning.
Isabel, do any of those, like the community benefits, which is now Section 37, or development charge affordable housing, is any of that able to find its way into operations as opposed to capital?
It's mostly capital.
Yeah, because I don't think that we can get it into operation, the affordable housing dollars into operation for programming. But what we can do is build housing with it.
Yes, yeah. It is capital. It is. That's a good point. It is capital investments.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. We have a question about our ridership. What if it doesn't come back in 2021 for OC Transpo? What's the plan? How would future budgeting handle that lack of revenue? We're struggling with that right now. I don't have an answer for you. So what we are looking forward to in 2021 is that we would continue to get funding from senior levels of government. Transit is it affects all levels of government. All levels of government want to move to more transit infrastructure. And so they do recognize the investment in that. So that's one area where hopefully they will continue to support us. If this is a longer term impact, we'd have to look at the operating models too. So everything's being looked at. Thank you. We have a question for
Theresa. Can I just add? I think,
sure,
Ms. Jasmine, that the feds have indicated that there will be funding to take us to April 1st, yes, 2021 on the transit file. And it's a wait and see approach till then. But I think our budget has to look for deferring capital projects and reducing expenditures in other transit envelopes in order to balance that budget. But in 2020, our revenue shortfall was about $120 million. That is a significant number. That's just the transit agency whose revenues were short from balancing. And so for me, this is a major red flag. The major revenue shortfall for the entire corporation is in transit revenues. And we hope there will be upper level government help. But my fear is at some point they're going to say one of two things. One is they can no longer continue to keep transferring money to municipalities, and or the amount they transfer does not equal the amount that we're short. And so I still think the city of Ottawa is going to be forced to making some reductions on the transit file. And I think this is going to be a major focus for us over the next year. So I want to flag or share, at least for me, this is a red flag.
And Riley and I have this discussion from time to time. It's not a given for me that if revenue continues to have that shortfall, that service reductions are one of the things that we need to look at. I'm willing to look at taxation. Obviously, I want to make sure that we are pressing our other level of government partners for funding. But keep in mind that the folks who are keeping our economy going today, who are facilitating much of the economic activity in the city, are getting to work on the bus. I think we have a tendency to view service cuts through the lens of people who are able to work from home. And a very large, significant number of people in our city are not able to do that. And these are the folks who are selling us the groceries that are making the pandemic, for many of us, such a cozy affair. They're working in the restaurants, they're delivering they're working in the restaurants, preparing the takeout food. They're working in our hospitals, and they're keeping our hospitals clean, and they're taking care of those of us who are in the hospitals. They're doctors and nurses. It's critical that we maintain service levels so that the city does not grind to a halt. But that's a discussion, obviously, that we're not going to solve today. I just want to make sure that that other perspective is out there.
Thanks, Jeff. And if I can add, I think that COVID-19 has proved that transit is an essential service, and it's not something that can rely on revenue. It's absolutely essential. We may have to have our mind changed around a bit, that it should be treated like garbage pickup or whatever else we have that we considered essential, that is out there and available.
Isabel, how much is, if it were to pass, would the transit levy be for the average urban home of 400 and however many $1,000 it is this year?
I have to pull up the report.
I'm sorry, thank you.
Yeah, no, I can get you that information.
Yep. If anyone has a question, when I say raise your hand, it's the raise hand button, if that's okay, because then I can, if that's all right, then I can see who's raised their hands, if that's all right with you. Thank you.
Sorry, I'm just going to wait for that. I'm just going to wait for that
Yep.
answer from Isabel, because one of the we currently fund transit through some of our capital is paid through gas taxes, but the majority of it comes from taxes and from revenues. And right now, I believe council still has a target of our operational expenditures being 55% from the fare box, 45% from taxes. It is legitimate to talk about different models, and I think Ms. Jasmine raised that.
Yep.
But what is that transit levy currently?
So it increases by $33, but I have to find the base from last year. Unfortunately, our report only showed the increase, not the actual amount. I have to look at last year what it was.
Okay. All right.
And I'd have to add $33 to it. Hang on a second.
Okay,
So that's
no
for an
worries.
average assessed to home of $415,000. Add $42. No, that's not right. That's an increase also.
Okay.
Let me get that for you.
No worries at all. So, we pay a transit levy, and one of the things in order to keep our economy moving along is we may have to look at an increase to that transit levy to fund rather than cut service.
Okay, there's lots of questions here, so I'll try and get through them here. A bunch came in, thank you. This is great. One is about if more people are working from home and fewer people are driving, so less money is needed for roads. Could that be transferred to transit? Well, that kind of fits in with what we're talking about, transit. Transit is required for those who are low income essential workers, and then less is required for riders. So, well, that's a philosophical question that we should think about, but in a broader scale. But keep in mind that buses are still on the roads too, so we have to keep them somewhat in shape. So it's not totally one versus the other, but it's great to think about these things outside the box. Just think. If
I can,
yes.
I think it's important to ask maybe Isabel for some clarification with respect to building roads. I think people take a look at a lot of the big road widening projects in the suburbs, building new roads when we build new suburbs. And those are largely built with development charges. Isabel, what would be a path to seeing development charge money turned into, say, transit operational money? If there is that path, because as far as I know, there isn't.
No. So again, it has to be for capital and it has to be for growth. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Is there any initiatives for food security that are within the budget, since that's a big issue? We did have the Seeds and Soil program, which successfully passed through council. I was very proud of that. Are we going to look at anything else in terms of helping people grow their own food in public spaces? And making that kind of investments? Is there anything in the budget like that?
Yeah, I don't have those details. No, we'll take it into consideration. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we'll keep track of some of these things because they and it's being beyond. Yeah, yeah, I think that's a good question. By the way, this past year, the city did have a human needs task force, which was put together for COVID. And these are the kinds of things they were looking at, was food security. So so they met with other partners in the community about this. The food bank was part of that meeting. And there's no doubt that that's still in the forefront of people's minds, because this hasn't gone away yet. So what have we grown out? What has come out of that? Well, we did have the Seeds and Soil. That was a small project, really. What else are we going to do? Well, I think it'll be continuing to work with our partners for sure, but we'll find out later about anything specific that's mentioned in the budget.
I just think it's important to note, Theresa, we don't know what's in the budget yet, the three councillors who are here. So in some of these instances, we won't be able to tell you what is or isn't in the budget, but what we can take away is your assertion that there should be money spent in the budget.
Absolutely. Okay, so some comments about transit being essential. The percentage of transit paid by fares is relatively high, so so asking for more to be out of the tax base. That the tax, okay, about the tax levy being increased to 4.6%, including 5 million increase contribution, replace the canceled provincial gas tax. This represents $33 per average household and $9 for the average rural household, and is a reduction from the 2020 requirements of $9 per average household and $4 for the average rural household. Okay, thank you. Christine, you had your hand up for a while, so why don't we go to you and we'll go back to the written questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Kavanagh. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Thank you. I have three questions, but I'll only do one, and then I'll wait my turn again. So my first one, it's related to this chart that I found on the city's website. How does the city compare with other municipalities in terms of taxes? And I've got this chart. I'm looking at it right now. It goes from 2011 to 2020. And I'm just puzzled because here we are sitting at a cumulative total in taxation of 20.39%. This is over the last 9 years. But that is really, really low compared to Toronto, Edmonton, Calgary, and Vancouver. Of course, Vancouver is much, much, much higher. That's the other extreme. But my question is there, I know everyone else might think, is she nuts? But, you know, I am somebody who believes that when there's a crisis, and there are two going on right now, there's the COVID and there's a climate crisis, right? Remember that? There's a climate crisis. Well, usually that means there's going to have to be some sacrifice on the people's part. And I'm wondering if that 3% tax is set in stone. Is that something that's set in stone and it will absolutely not go any higher?
That's a good
And
question.
I'm raising this in relation to all this other information. So I
Yeah.
hope my question is clear.
That is the starting point. Let me phrase it that way. That is the way the mayor is set it up, so that we set what the budget increase is, and then we work within that. So currently that is the setup. I don't know if my colleagues want to have some further comments on that.
It's a council approved direction, which
Yeah.
is a framework to give our staff marching orders to put a budget together. But when budget comes back to us, members of council, based on feedback we receive, those numbers can be adjusted.
I would just say this council, every year I have a song and dance with the mayor. It's like a little script. And I ask the city clerk, if we provide this 3% direction to staff, are we bound by that 3% cap when it comes time to vote on a final budget? And every year the clerk tells me no, we are not bound by that. But in fact, the majority of this city council support the mayor's election promise to keep our tax increase to 3%. Of which 2/3 is for, so 2% out of the 3% is for the increased operational pressures at the City of Ottawa, and 1/3 is going toward infrastructure renewal, which was a priority that every councillor around the city heard when we were knocking doors in the last election. Was our roads are falling apart and our parks buildings are falling apart. So instead of 2% increase like we had last term of council, we have 3%. And I don't know how many councillors would share your perspective. I do. That you know, in a climate crisis and a housing emergency crisis, that we should stick to, or that we should go beyond that 3, or even reallocate that 1% that is currently going into infrastructure. But the mayor, who has a very large number of supporters around the council table, is pretty dead set on his approach. Sorry, if I can just quickly say, my house is valued at roughly the urban average, and my transit levy was $864 last year.
Okay, I just did the calculation. It was for the average at 3,800. It's around $685.
I'm valued a little bit higher than the average, but that's sort of the ballpark. Is if you were to double, if you were to ask people to pay for all of transit operational on the tax base alone, you would be looking at adding, you know, an additional $600, $700, $800 a year onto people's tax bills. Which, if you are a 2-person household, would be, both of whom are buying a bus pass, would be a significant savings. Just saying.
Yeah.
I just want to say, from a strategic point of view, if going above the 3% is an unlikely outcome from council, I don't want people to feel that that is their only hope to push major items that they think council should be investing more into. The other is you look at trade-offs. I don't accept from the city manager or any senior manager that in a $4.5 billion organization, there isn't room to adjust allocations from one line to another. I just don't accept it. I also don't accept the fact that it's your job, members of the public, to read the 12-inch thick binder, understand it, and come up with viable options or offsets. I think the one thing I want you to leave here tonight is identify your priorities for me and your councillors. Engage with us, dialogue with us, tell us what your priorities are. And at the end of the day, it's our job to help look for areas where we can fit that in. But I don't want folks to feel discouraged that if that 3% isn't going to budge, that's the only way. There are other ways to, let's just say, adjust the budget. So I just wanted to raise that as well.
Okay. Great. Yes. There's, as we said from the beginning, we have a lot of vulnerable residents in the city, more than ever before. Those people that worked at those places that are all going out of business. So they should be the priority. And that's the way our thinking cap should work in terms of when we're looking at this budget. A comment on transit services, shifting frequency to reliability, i.e. fewer buses, but more reliable. Okay, that's something to think about. I think there's a little bit of a fear that if we have fewer buses, it won't be any different, because there's a lot of reasons for problems with reliability. So I think that's a big conversation for Transit Commission for sure. But thank you. Does the city have partnerships with local ag producers and facilitate them to sell their produce? I don't know if that's a question we can answer here, but it's again something that we can look at, maybe perhaps at the human task force level of things that we need for people to get food security and working with our partners. Consider the move to intensification in urban areas. Is there any move to give higher priority to renewal of aging community services and recreation buildings in the core areas? I think all of our councillors here would agree with that, but Isabel, what about the renewal of older buildings? Has that been prioritized yet?
Yeah, well, so all of this goes into our state of asset report. There's a state of asset report that's produced every term of council, and the state of those assets is tracked very closely. And that's what we build into our long range financial plan. If we're not funding sufficiently, we have to increase. And that's that infrastructure gap we're talking about. So we're trying to close that gap over the next now 7 years. We originally the plan was for 10 years, but we've stepped up how much we're contributing to that infrastructure gap to reduce that time frame. But it's all based on the state of the assets and that plan to fund at an appropriate level.
Thank you. Miranda is asking about suggestions for kids riding free with parents and other fair talk questions. And I think we have at least 4 crises: COVID, climate, opioid, and homelessness. I think we can agree on that. Thank you. Just go down. Is there any hands up right now? Just check. Okay, Elizabeth, you had your hand up, and then we'll go back to Christine.
Hi, yeah. So I have a main question. I also had one in the chat around OPH that I put in around 6:55 that got missed, so that could be addressed later.
No, I haven't got to it yet, but
But my main question is around meeting other priorities. So you're talking a lot about, this is going to be a tough year. There's issues with revenue. My big concern is the really big things with these crises. We got to get moving, and we got to get moving in steps. So I'm really want the evolution plans to be adopted and funded, because like we're talking about housing, we're talking about building retrofits. That's a big part of the plan. And so if we decide to put off on one part of the plan and go ahead on the other, or we start doing a little bit of the 15-minute neighborhood, but we're not doing the green infrastructure and energy and heat capture, whatever, we're just going to be we're doing a two-legged race or whatever. When you three-legged race, you got to be in step. We got to keep it connected, or else we're just going to stumble and fall flat on our face. So basically the idea is not to be putting things off, or at least especially the strategic thing, but also definitely some funding, if not all funding, that's been requested through the energy evolution. Saw like the big headline, like I've been going through the information sessions, the technical sessions, briefings, and the big headline was it's going to cost, $3.2 billion. And the little headline, it's going to take, a dozen years and we'll be earning money on this. So it's just going to be more expensive to deal with this crisis later on. And, we got to meet our goals, our 15-minute neighborhood goals, our other goals. So to keep it all connected and not just lag behind in certain areas, because it's really easy to say, oh, it's an emergency here, let's forget about that other emergency. So I hear that housing and COVID are really high up on everyone's list, and I absolutely agree. But if we start trying to address these things, well, COVID, we might not have to address using the climate lens, but housing, we definitely got to address a climate lens, because housing is a massive part of environmental footprint, that and transit, which we've also been discussing a lot. So the idea is keeping the climate lens as one of the other lenses and actually backing it up with teeth, with, with bylaws, with all the resources that the city can dispose, including financial resources. Yeah.
Okay, I don't know if there was a question in there, but I definitely comments. So I don't think we've got your drift. Thank you. And I'm just looking through.
Christine Johnson is next, Councillor.
Okay, okay, Christine.
Thank you. Thank you. I know I've asked this many times, and Councillor Brockington, you've probably answered, but I'm going to ask it again. Who does decide how development charges are used? Like, who actually makes those decisions? Who is the person who decides? Like, let's say something's being built, you know, well, Claridge has just built something. So what happens to their development charges, and who decides? Oh, I hope I'm not putting you on the spot, but just generally, it doesn't have to be specifically about that specific project, but in general, somebody must know who decides. That's my question.
I think Ms. Jasmine can
I can answer
talk about which DCs are collected and how they're put in the pot and disseminated.
So there's regulations controlling all of this. We have what we call a DC background study, and there's rules around what can be allocated to what you can allocate development charges to. It's based on the next 10-year plan of the city and what the requirements are. It has to be aligned with the official plan and all of the other plans. And that's how you calculate the development charge in terms of what needs to be collected. But we collect it for stormwater, we collect it for transit, we collect it for roads, but it has to be growth. These are all growth projects aligned with the overall official plan.
Isabel, I think that's important to note because that's it's for projects, right? The way the city gets planned to the point where you're starting to see very micro decisions about Claridge's X number of dollars that are going into the roads DCs then get spent on the Strand-Heard widening. It's because the Strand-Heard widening is in the Transportation Master Plan. The master plans come up with lists of projects, and then at a very simple level, the city determines in order to deal with the growth that we're going to have over the next number of years, we have to build the following, and that cuts across solid waste, it's wastewater, it's roads, it's all kinds of things that we have to build, field houses, and that's a list of projects, and then it says all of those projects are going to cost this much money. We anticipate that there are going to be this many new units built, and therefore the charge at a very high level is going to be X number of dollars for every door that's built. And then that money is going to go into stringently described projects. And those project lists that come out of the master planning process, those are appealed. Like, those are the result of lots of argument between the city and developers who don't want to have big project lists come in where the city does. So it's all very closely prescribed what those things are spent on. It's not spent on the fly. How those development charges are going to get spent was decided years ago. Yeah. I'm just curious, are you asking about development charges or community benefits? Section 37. Not Section 37, eh? Okay.
Thank you.
I'm not sure the two are clear in my mind. What is the difference between the two?
There are development charges, which are a complex issue and very prescribed. Then there are community benefits, which they're not called that yet. Section 37 of the Planning Act allows municipalities to require developers, when they get increases in density over and above what current zoning allows for, they have to kick a portion of the value of that new allowance back to the city for public benefits. And those public benefits are things that your councillor largely gets to work on. I love Section 37 because before they can move forward, they have to have the councillor's permissions. So,
Okay.
but those are really small compared to the billions of dollars we're talking about over years in development charges.
Yep. And of course, if you don't have a lot of development in your ward, it's a different story, but it's starting to change everywhere. What is the city going to do? Does it have any guess on the percentage of businesses that may default on their taxes in 2021? Because we're seeing a lot of empty brick and mortar stores, and I'm wondering if this is a problem and how much does that represent of the tax base?
So I can speak to 2020. We have not seen a huge default rate. The Ottawa market is relatively stable, like relative to other municipalities that are much more reliant on industry and the private sector. We've got a lot of public sector people that are just working from home, so they're not as impacted as some of the other cities. So we have actually seen a very small increase in our default rate.
Okay. I'll just read another one that's in the chat and then go back to hands up if that's okay. Elizabeth had her question on Ottawa public health and what if it's how much it's getting from is it getting an increased role, and how is its financial support increased compared to other years for Ottawa public health?
So Ottawa public health, a lot for COVID specifically, the province has basically told them, like, do what you need to do and we will make you whole. So there is government funding coming for public health in 2020. Not sure what the plans are for 2021, but so far it's been do what you need to do and then we will keep you whole. We don't have exact numbers yet, but I believe the pot that was put aside for the province is about 100 million, or maybe it was Canada. I can't remember. I'm sorry. But there is money put aside for public health specifically.
Yeah. Okay. Great. For participants, Annette is next. Annette Dillon.
Oh, hey there. I just wanted to comment with Elizabeth, because she and I often talk on Fridays with Anita Vandenbelt, and Elizabeth is correct in terms of the number of crises. But I do always ask myself, we do have limited resources in people and budgets. How does any level of government plan and manage? Like, is the budget static, or is the budget always evolving? So for instance, Elizabeth is correct. I mean, climate change is, makes the COVID look like a pimple, but it will always be something that possibly gets put aside because you have immediate pressures like the pandemic, homelessness, and the opioid crisis are very real. People see it and feel it. So can the city's budget be so robust and live that it can change according to the need, like a pandemic that came upon us? And the second part would be, does the city keep aside a certain percentage of the budget to really address climate change? And as regards Elizabeth's comment on housing, you cannot just spring upon any developer, whether it's nonprofit or for-profit. If you change the requirements in terms of how that builder has to build, you've got to remember the time lag. He was planning this 4 to 8 years ago under certain regulations. So it always has to be a going forward. If you're trying to marry social outcomes of affordability, advocacy in terms of housing, energy, greenhouse gas reductions, if you spring it on developers, they will never develop.
It's similar for the city. We budget for the longer term. We year over year blips, we manage through our reserves. So we put in a reserve policy several years ago. We need to put so much aside for emergency situations, and that's what we've done. COVID has been an extended emergency situation, and so we've gone further to then defer capital projects to put more aside to backstop us. So things that are fluctuating, we have reserves. For our budgeting, we have a longer term plan. So we look 10 years out. So for climate change, for example, now that will form part of our long range financial plans. We have to look 10 years out now, what our requirements are and what do we need to do to build up to that. So all our long range financial plans aren't, you know, we need to collect 1 billion next year. It's we need to do it over the next 10 years, and how do we do that? And it's not just through taxes. There's multiple sources of funding. We look at all options. We look at, you know, our debt. Can we issue more debt so that future generations are paying for it, not current taxpayers? Senior levels of government. We look at all different sources of funding.
I think that this year's been exceptionally unusual with COVID. We had some practice runs of things that were not expected, like a flood or a very, very difficult winter. Those things we have dealt with. And so obviously budgets had to be adjusted for them because we didn't have a flood budget. We didn't have we went probably over and above in our snow budget that year for 2019 winter. But so there's obviously got to be some flexibility for those big things. Right now, we know COVID's is continuing, so so we can prepare a bit more. And these are all good questions of how we're preparing and what do we focus on. I don't know if my colleagues want to make any comments as well on that.
If I may, I just wanted to address the development charge question. I'm very interested in development charges. I spend a lot of time looking and thinking about them. You know, the development charge bylaw comes in place every 5 years or so, and then it gets appealed, and then a year later or a little bit longer, we have the final development charges. There's not that many years in which there is surprise between when you plan a development and then when you actually go to build. And if a door goes up by $2,000 that was unanticipated, that should not make or break a project. It's simply, you know, if when a door is selling for $500,000, you know, they'll sell that door whether it's $500,000 or whether it's $502,000. But the necessity of getting those development charges in is absolutely critical, because in order to be able to live sustainably in growth units, we have to build new infrastructure. We have to build new storm and wastewater infrastructure. We have to build public transit to get people around in a sustainable way. I personally, I like predictability, but if development charges go up by more than developers are anticipating in any given DC bylaw, they are able to appeal that to the province. And if they're still a little bit higher, the amounts of money that we're talking about are not enough to make or break a project. Development charges are critical to how we're going to grow sustainably and build the infrastructure, and we need to charge what we need to charge.
Thanks. Raleigh, did you want to add anything?
Just to go back, sorry, Annette, I don't know your last name. If I can call you Annette. We,
Yes.
again, my advice is once the budget comes out, if you or your community group has a particular interest, mosquito abatement. North Canada has this mosquito abatement. I'm just using this as an example, but go work with your counselor, find out what's allocated. If there is insufficient allocation or no allocation, then you work with your counselor on a plan. And that might actually not necessarily have to come through the budget. I take 30 pages of notes when I door knock in an election. I don't do it all the first year. I look at what's low-hanging fruit, what requires a 2 to 3 year plan, what's a long-term plan, and plan accordingly and find out where, what the best time is to move certain items. But once the budget's been released, there's a lot of questions that are sent to finance just to get a better understanding of what's allocated, what's new in 2021, to the question about whether it's static or whether it evolves. It absolutely has to evolve to address those new needs. But that's for your counselor to do, is to find those details, share it with you. And then if community groups feel very passionately that there needs to be a change in the budget, then it's the counselor's job to find, okay, how do I get that addressed?
Great, thank you. We have a question from Jared about the speed cameras being used in school zones, and where does the revenue from the tickets go? And are funds available to be used for traffic calming measures within a ward? Isabel, do you want to answer the global question about that? I mean, we can talk about our own wards, but.
Sorry, what was the question? Sorry.
It was about the speed cameras and
Yes.
where the ticket money goes, and does it go into traffic calming measures within a ward?
So the speed is the speed ones, yes, there is going back to the plan, the overall. Try to remember the name of the report.
Road safety action plan.
The safety measures. So anything from the speed is going to safety measures, road safety measures. That was part of the plan. And then there's a report, I believe, coming out in Q1 2021 to talk about what the results are of the initial pilot that they're running this year for that program.
Okay. And this was something that the province allowed us to do, just so you know. And so every area, like I got one, and it was picked out. And we'd all like more, because for the double whammy of getting people to slow down in front of schools, and the fact that the revenue is being used for traffic calming. So it's a good idea. We've just started, really. I have one in front of, on Bayshore, in front of St. Rosa de Lima.
I think we need to refine that answer a bit further. I think it's also going to some other, I think the police get a chunk, but
That's red light.
we have an annual traffic calming budget to begin with. Speed cameras or no speed cameras. It's been upgraded from 40,000 to 50,000, and councillors 100% control that budget, working with their communities. That's the painted messaging, the yellow flex sticks, the speed display boards, speed bumps. The budgets have been increased because we can now put permanent measures like bulbs in the curb bulbs and the speed bumps. But this report that comes out that Ms. Jasmine referenced, for those of you interested in traffic calming and traffic safety, the key question the public wants to know is, in addition to how much money have we raised in revenue, is where is that going? And how much say does council have in where that money goes locally? So stay tuned, but certainly very, very important, because this, I think we're going to be surprised that this is going to blow our estimates out of the water, how much revenue this first round of speed cameras have brought in. I was very surprised with that announcement about the first 2 weeks. That completely blew me out of the water. And I think after 6 months, the revenues are going to be way out there. So there needs to be,
yeah. Or everyone will slow down. But
Trisha has kind of nuanced the question a bit. Do the fines for speed cameras stay in a ward or a central pot? Like Theresa, I take it you were able to get one. The urban councillors are very frustrated because we don't have any speed cameras, and there's a variety of reasons for that. You're not getting a bigger traffic calming budget than we are because you have a speed camera and are able to take a share of that booty.
I was not given that indication.
Yep.
They went by certain prescriptive requirements for the first pilot projects, and that's how Bayshore got chosen, and it's a good spot for it.
Every spot is a good,
yeah.
We do not resent anyone getting the speed cameras. We need more of them.
But I think it was meant to be a central pot. But I certainly will. I mean, if people are speeding, I think that indicates that maybe we need something in that area to slow them down. So I think it's kind of it's showing that the solution is needed as well, that we need to slow people down. I'm actually hearing from the speeders, wow, you should slow me down. Then I wouldn't have got a ticket. So I think we have to look at that for sure. Because I'd rather just have calm streets. Yeah, the bucks are coming in, but we will make good use of them in terms of traffic calming, but it's not clear to me if it was meant to be. I think it's more central. It's not that I get that money or something. it's nice, but I want to see it safe everywhere, and I want to make sure people slow down everywhere. We have a question from Roland. When budgeting for its capital and program expenditure, what's the rate of inflation does the city assume?
The rate of inflation for, sorry, which one?
What is the rate of inflation that we assume as a city?
As a city?
Yeah.
So it depends on the item. That's why I wanted to be specific. So for construction, I believe we're using 2.8%.
Okay.
This year. Last year would have been 5.6%. So it depends. It fluctuates every year. So for capital projects, we use different inflation rates. For utilities, hydro, 5 to 6%. So it depends on the specific items. For resources, we base it on the collective agreements and how they're increasing. So it's not a specific inflation rate for all items. Every item has a different factor.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so I think traffic calming is still a very important issue. Just looking to see if anyone has their hand up. Not at the moment. Did I miss any questions? I'm sorry if I did, because sort of they came in fast and furious, and I tried to catch most of them.
There was the question about transferring money from OPS to Ottawa Public Health. Do we want to address that one?
Yeah, go ahead.
So what's the question specific? Can we? Is that the question?
Can we?
Oh, sorry. I think Elizabeth asked it, and I just have to scroll up.
Yeah, it was just in relation to my Ottawa Public Health question. It's just, I know that it was voted on differently, and you said at the beginning that Ottawa Police Service budget is determined separately. I'm just expressing disappointment at that decision. That's all.
There is a process.
Yeah,
but we should talk about the process.
Yeah, there's a question from Kathy at the very end here, which is very specific to the process of determining that budget.
Can I just say first, though, on the Ottawa Public Health budget, without having seen their budget for 2021, because we approved a budget direction of a 2.5% increase, they absolutely need more funds. And the fact that I voted against last week transferring money from police to health doesn't mean I'm against Ottawa Public Health's budget. I need to see their draft budget first, and I need to see their list of priorities that cannot be funded within the existing budget, and then make a determination by how much more their budget should increase. And then we have a discussion, where should that come from? So at least speaking for myself, that I didn't believe Ottawa Public Health deserves more funds. They do. So that conversation and debate is still coming.
Yeah, and as was stated earlier by Isabel, the funds for Ottawa Public Health come from the province. That's how it's funded primarily, and they have been promised the recent funding to cover COVID, but frankly, before COVID happened, they were on the verge of dismantling Ottawa Public Health and making it amalgamate with a whole bunch of rural areas, which would have just been very problematic. So obviously that didn't happen. We need the province to have solid funding. So that I agree with Riley on that this is a discussion we still need to have. Now the question is, how is the police budget decided? Is it decided separately by just the police board?
So it's provided through the directions. We give them an envelope, basically on the directions report. There's a certain percentage, so we included 3%. We calculate that on their base, and that's their envelope, and they then work the line item details within that envelope.
But Isabel, if I may, I mean, they're not bound to follow our directions, right? So it is moral suasion. Our budget direction is a form of moral suasion in which we indicate the increase that council would like them to land within, but they are free to propose a different budget they can propose a budget that is higher than the guidance that we give them. And then council can either say yes or no to that budget, but they can't start allocating money within that budget to other line items within the city budget. The police budget is determined by the Ottawa Police Services Board, but the budget directions is not a binding document on them.
Yeah, and in terms of reducing crime, yeah, there's many ways. I just had a task force myself in my ward talking about what we need for youth, and it was specific about our racialized community that where we've seen a rise in crime and issues with people in our area, which created more neighborhood resource teams. And you know, I'm grateful for police, but at the same time, I think we all would much rather have resources for those youth. That is something that's very important, and that's part of the reason I put together a task force, because that is the crux of it, is people getting in trouble primarily out of poverty and not having options. So that's a very big discussion, and I want to say I had Crime Prevention Ottawa as one of my guests there. They do excellent work, so much. I'd love to see their budget increase, because they do great work in terms of working on some of the issues that are about crime and what causes crime in our community. Very preventative oriented. Yeah, any further comments, you guys?
Just, you know, it's a long discussion, and we can't necessarily have it here tonight about police police governance and budgeting. But Grace asked a really interesting question, which is why aren't the police under more control from the elected officials, and how are the police board officials selected? Police board officials are selected partly by the city, and it appoints city councillors to the board. The province selects people to sit on there as well. But the big question, why aren't the police under more control from elected officials, is because police are not like other departments. They are law enforcement. Politicians make laws, and then police enforce those laws. And you know, this is a huge philosophical discussion that we are going to continue having in the city. But when you start to see a lot of political control over police, that can be very problematic. Right? Police should be hands off from politicians with respect to law enforcement. If politicians don't like the way that laws are being enforced, they need to change the laws. And then, of course, the courts are the third part of that three-legged stool that interpret how police should enforce laws. It's not a given that police should be under very direct control of elected officials. And that's a Western liberal democratic concept. So it's not something we can obviously solve tonight.
It's a two-way sword, and you made a good point there. Thank you.
Can I just say, yeah, I just want to say one thing.
Yeah.
If I can, yeah. If I was in charge of Ottawa all by myself, sometimes I wish I was, here's what I would do. The police chief would come to council after his first year, and he'd say, council, here is my vision for the next number of years that I'm the police chief. I've lived through the police force the last year. I've seen some of the challenges that we have. I now have a good sense of where I want to take this police service. Here is my vision. I'm communicating with you. Then council says, you know what, we still have these large chasms in a number of our social and community services that serves our most at-risk needy citizens. And we can identify where those gaps are and how much more resources that they need. Those are two separate conversations. Then you pull in people who believe that the police are doing things that they really shouldn't be doing. And some of those resources may be freed up to do other things, which could include plugging the social and community need holes or chasms that exist. But for anyone that thinks that there's going to be these broad, massive reductions to the police, Sometimes people have punitive motives at hand and they're automatically going to go to others. That's not going to happen. There might be some in council who'll feel that, but I think there needs to be a strategic way of identifying those community and social needs that exist, make a case, and then it's up to us to find ways to do that. It might come from the OPS, it might not. But there's no way that a majority of council are going to support these slash and burn motions. And so I'm trying to encourage residents who have very legitimate concerns that this is the way I think is the best way to move forward to get those addressed.
Maybe we should invite him, Riley. I mean, we have Vera there all the time.
I've been trying for 4 months.
I'm with you. I like it. Annette has a question about the long-term care facilities, the cities. Is the city prepared budget-wise for a possible catastrophe failure of long-term care homes? Well,
Theresa, if I can add, I'm thinking beyond the 4 from the city. So as we see, you know, the potential lawsuits, the very cruel, very sad situation in long-term care, lenders and bankers that finance these will get nervous and will not want to renew financing, will step away. So I guess the question would be, the need will still be there. And these homes, we have to remember, are not just for seniors. 18% of the residents in long-term care are non-seniors. They could be First Nations folks. They could be people that aged out of the child welfare system. They could be car accident victims. So there will be a need, and would it if the private sector isn't there, and there is a big call for governments to take over and make these public, the cost would be humongous, and is it Jasmine when she's talking about the long range planning?
Isabel, Jasmine.
Sorry, yeah. Do you have a plan there for that? Because when you follow closely the banking industry, there is deep concern. At the moment, there's only really 3 major bankers in Canada that finance long-term care.
Yeah. If I may, Annette, before Isabel says anything, we do have our 4 homes, long-term care. It is provincially operated, completely long-term care, as is health. And would take, that's a biggie, and because all our funding comes from the province, but I'll let Isabel explain that part.
Well,
I know how it works. I know how, you don't have to explain to me. I've financed them for 30 years, but I'm saying there is the province. So does it really mean that the federal government would step in? I guess that's what is your plan? Because I can predict they will fail without government. The private sector, so all the talk about having the private sector move away, you don't have to waste much time any level of government, because they will move away. These things are not profitable.
It's a huge question. It's not related to tonight's topic of the municipal budget, though, the immediate municipal budget for 2021. But it's something to be aware of as citizens, for sure. And as you mentioned, it will be the feds that would be dealing with it. I don't know if my colleagues want to comment, but that would be something huge for the city to take on more long-term care facilities. Don't forget, there's also a nonprofit sector as well. But are we willing to go into the business more? That's a very big question, but it won't be in this budget, that's for sure. So, but thank you. There was a question about education that I saw, about education and schools, and through funding through the Ottawa Public Library or direct spending. It is a provincial issue, as you pointed out, and but there's a bit of a crisis. So should we be making better use maybe of our library system? I don't know if that's kind of where you're going, James. But that's a philosophical question about is James here? Do you want to explain that? I just want to make sure I haven't got it wrong. Is that what you mean? Through the library system, that's our basic. I guess, as close as we get in terms of education, except maybe recreation. Okay, James says I got it. Okay, so Riley, are you on the library board?
I am.
Yeah, maybe you can comment.
Sorry, was the question, how can we better educate folks about COVID?
No, I think they're saying how we, because education is in a crisis, I guess they're suggesting a lien on the municipalities because we have the library system. So, you know, have we, you know, kind of jumped in there to help out in terms of our resources as a library?
Obviously, people know the services libraries offer. The challenge right now during COVID is we are restricted in not allowing people to congregate within the library. So there's no opportunities for people to stay at any length. It's basically come in, get the resources to pick up or off the shelf, and off you go. But we have developed a reopening strategy. So 22 of the 35 branches have reopened. Bookmobile service has started to come up again. But we're not at a point yet in our libraries where our programming and other services can facilitate that type of service. So it's frustrating because we want to help as a library. We know that the schools are back and want to provide that additional support to students who need homework clubs or tutoring or other services, outreach with New Canadians. It's just not possible. We have to be bound by the provincial regulations.
Yeah. Both Riley and I were school board trustees, so it's probably close to our hearts on that respect. And well, I'm sure for Jeff as well, no doubt. I'm just going to read one last question because we're up at 8 o'clock now. And it's about, do you expect to increase debt issuance for 2021 through the issuance of more City of Ottawa bonds, including green bonds? It seems that the province and federal governments have increased debt issuance substantially during the COVID shock. Will the City of Ottawa plan to follow suit and go into debt to source additional cash to pay for planned expenditures?
So we can issue debt for operations. We're very different from the federal and provincial levels of government. They can issue debt to pay for their operations. We can't. We are very limited. We can only issue debt for capital. And so that's what we limit ourselves to. And it's, again, based on the long-range financial plans. And we have policies in terms of we don't want to issue more than 7.5% of so that we don't exceed 7.5% debt servicing of our own revenue. So we manage it very, very closely, and it's based on our capital plans.
Thank you. Well, I think we'll wrap up, and I just want to let my colleagues say some closing words. And thank everyone for coming out tonight. Of course, this has been great. If you haven't got your question answered or don't feel you got a fulsome answer, please send it over and we'll make sure you do. Sometimes when there's a lot of comments, I'm looking for the question. But we got through most of them, I think, and there's good variety. I really enjoyed seeing the variety of questions. Great stuff. So Jeff, I'll throw it over to you.
Sure. I'll just say thank you very much to everyone for participating tonight. I am just one of the things that I think would be helpful is trying to help residents understand how budgeting is done. Mm-hmm. I think that there is, it's complex and there are a lot of rules. In planning, we have the planning primer. And I'm just wondering, Isabel, whether there's ever been any thought to helping residents understand budget through the same kind of seminar series. Because I think residents start to get very frustrated. Why can't we take money from the police budget and put it into mental health resources at the Ottawa Public Health? And why can't we take money from widening a road from a suburb into the downtown, but we can't use it to build bike lanes in an existing neighborhood? Have you ever thought about providing the same sort of thing that the planning department does?
We did a series of videos, I believe, a couple of years ago. There's just kind of budgeting 101 that people could just go in and click on. But I'm open to suggestion. I mean, if there was a burning desire to learn about the city's budget, we would certainly take that into consideration.
We get a really good overview in counselor school when we get elected, and there's actually a course for candidates that one of our residents offers that over the course of a couple of days really gives you a good understanding of how budgeting is done. Anyways, I will leave it at that. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. Riley?
Thank you everyone for coming. I know talking about a budget may not be the most interesting subject material, but this is the document that prioritizes the City of Ottawa's residents' needs and priorities. And it's very important for elected members of council to know what those are. And you know, that doesn't come just in the fall, it comes 12 months a year. 12 months a year, we get communication from our residents about changes they would like to see in our wards and in our city. And we compile those requests and try and find ways to address them throughout the year. And in fact, I'd say 99% of the things that I champion in my ward, I don't bring motions at budget for. It's the roll up the sleeves and address those matters with city staff throughout the 12 months. And so I don't want anyone to get discouraged that if they don't see particular motions addressing their needs or requests, that they're being ignored or that their issue isn't important. We have many different ways to try and address those. But I just want to go back to the main things, and that is, I think what's happened in 2020, when you look at the various movements and social demonstrations that we've seen, there needs to be a real focus on the gaps in our social and community programs and needs that exist, particularly for the less or the marginalized and then the most at risk. And I think if we as a council can address that going into 2021, I think we can say we will have made progress. We won't address everything, but we have to, as someone said, evolve and demonstrate that we are progressing and addressing the needs of our residents. So thank you for attending. I appreciate it very much. And again, please feel free to contact me after tonight if you have any other items to share with me. So thank you.
Excellent. Thank you to my colleagues, and thank you to staff for giving us some time this evening. Isabel and Stefan, thank you so much for your expertise. It's very, very helpful. I really appreciate it. Every time everyone asks a question, I always learn a little bit more too. And I'm a first-term counselor, and the way to learn is to ask questions. Well, why can't we do that? And why isn't it like that? And you keep learning and learning and learning. I watched MPs go through that process on Parliament Hill, watching them learn things. And the best way to do it was just kind of, you know, having a goal and trying to reach it, and seeing what the road takes you. So I think that a lot of us care a lot about what's happening, and we're keeping our eye open for those that are the most vulnerable. And that should be the priority. So thank you so much. I really appreciate all your input. And like I said, and my colleagues have said, if you have further questions, we'll get you answers. Take care.